The galaxy was a vast and ever-changing tapestry of stars and planets, each with its own story, its own history. But to Princess Kalith, the young ruler of the Elvathan people, her world, the planet Isal, was all she had ever known. For centuries, her ancestors had maintained a tradition of keeping their distance from the galaxy's conflicts. The Elvathans, highly advanced yet deeply spiritual, had never sought out war, power, or control beyond their borders. Instead, they had focused on peace, art, and the preservation of their ancient ways. Theirs was a quiet existence, unmarred by the turmoil that often consumed the stars. But all of that was about to change. Kalith stood in the great hall of her palace, gazing out over the distant horizon of Isal's capital city. The twin suns were setting, casting long shadows across the plains and turning the sky a deep orange. She could feel the weight of her duty pressing on her shoulders, the responsibility to her people. Her father, the king, had passed away a year ago, leaving her to rule in his place. It had been a year filled with doubts and challenges. The Elvathans were a peaceful race, but there were whispers of unrest among the stars. The Krillian horde, a fierce and brutal species known for their unrelenting aggression, had been growing bolder in their raids along the outer edges of the galaxy. Kalith knew that it was only a matter of time before the Krillians would turn their attention to Isal. The Elvathans had always been a proud people, but pride alone would not keep them safe. They needed strength, they needed allies, but they had none. The galaxy had turned its back on them, and their isolationist policies had made them enemies to many. The Elvathans had few resources, no military to speak of, and a growing sense of fear that they would soon be overrun. That was when the message came. The ambassador, a representative of the human people from Earth, had made contact. At first, Kalith had been skeptical. The humans were a young species in the grand scheme of the galaxy, barely reaching out beyond their own solar system. They were known for their ingenuity and resilience, but also for their unpredictability. Some saw them as a potential ally, others as a dangerous unknown. But the ambassador had been persistent, and his words were powerful. He offered an alliance, a marriage between Kalith and a human leader in exchange for protection from the Krillian horde. The humans, he promised, would lend their technology and strength to the Elvathans in exchange for a place in the galaxy's future. The ambassador spoke of honor, of unity, of a shared future where both races could grow and thrive together. He painted a picture of peace and prosperity, one where the Elvathans would no longer have to fear the Krillians. Kalith was torn. Her people had always prided themselves on their independence, and the idea of joining with another species, especially one as new and untested as humanity, was difficult to swallow. But she could see the writing on the wall. The Krillians were coming. And without help, her people would be powerless to stop them, so she agreed. She met with the ambassador in a private chamber within the palace. The room was quiet, the air thick with tension. Kalith's advisors had warned her against this move, urging caution. But in her heart, she knew what had to be done. The future of her people depended on it. The ambassador was a tall man, dressed in fine clothes that spoke of both power and diplomacy. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and his voice was smooth, filled with the kind of charm that could persuade even the most stubborn of leaders. He spoke of the mutual benefits of the alliance, of the strength the humans could offer in battle, and of the peace they could bring to the Elvathans. He promised that the marriage between Kalith and the human leader would be one of respect, of shared purpose, and of honor. It would not be the kind of forced union that so many feared, but one built on the foundation of mutual understanding. Kalith listened, her mind racing as the ambassador's words washed over her. The offer was tempting. The humans were powerful, their technology far beyond anything her people had ever seen. They could defeat the Krillians, protect her planet, and ensure the survival of her people. But there was a part of her that hesitated, a part of her that feared the cost of such an alliance. Would they truly respect the Elvathans, or would they, like so many others, seek to control them to use them for their own purposes? But there was no time for hesitation. The Krillians were growing stronger, their ships moving closer to Elvathan space with each passing day. Kalith's people were ill-prepared for war. They needed help, and they needed it now. She made her decision. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within her. "We will unite with humanity. For the future of my people and for the peace of the galaxy." The ambassador smiled, a look of satisfaction crossing his face. "You will not regret this, Princess. Together we will forge a new future, one of strength, honor, and prosperity." As he spoke, Caliph couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was more to this alliance than the ambassador was letting on. But she pushed the thought aside. There was no time for doubts now. The Elvathans had made their choice. The marriage would take place soon, and with it, the promise of salvation. Days later, Caliph found herself aboard a human starship, on her way to Earth to begin the marriage ceremonies. The ship was sleek and powerful, its engines humming with the kind of energy that only the most advanced civilizations could produce. As she gazed out of the observation window, watching the stars blur into streaks of light as they traveled through space, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This was a new chapter for her people, and for herself. She had agreed to the marriage, but she wasn't sure what to expect once she arrived on Earth. The humans, she had been told, were not like the Elvathans. They were bold, daring, and driven by ambition. Their history was one of war and conflict, of survival against impossible odds. She had heard stories of their struggles, of how they had fought back against alien invaders, and how they had eventually emerged as a powerful force in the galaxy. But what did they want with the Elvathans? Was this alliance truly one of peace, or was there something more? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the ambassador's offer than he had let on. But again, there was no time for doubts. The marriage would go forward, and Caliph would play her part, no matter the cost. When Caliph arrived on Earth, she was greeted with grandeur. The humans rolled out the red carpet for her, offering her lavish gifts and honors. The cities were sprawling, filled with towering buildings and advanced technology that dwarfed anything the Elvathans had. Everything seemed larger than life, everything except the people. Despite their impressive technology, the humans were just that, people. They were flawed, imperfect, and driven by desires that often seemed at odds with the promises of peace and honor the ambassador had spoken of. Caliph couldn't help but notice the disparity between the public display of respect and the undercurrent of something darker. It was as though the humans were waiting for her to prove her worth, to show that she was deserving of the promises they had made. The marriage ceremonies were grand, and Caliph was married to the human leader in a ceremony filled with pomp and circumstance. The ambassador stood by her side, his smile never faltering, as they exchanged vows before a crowd of high-ranking officials and dignitaries. But as the ceremony ended and the celebrations began, Caliph couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had agreed to this marriage in good faith, but the more she learned about the humans, the more she began to wonder if they had been truthful with her. What had she really agreed to? What had her people really signed up for? As the evening wore on and the music and laughter filled the air, Caliph slipped away from the festivities, retreating to the quiet solitude of her quarters. She stood before the window, gazing out at the city below. She had taken her first step into a new future, but was it the future she had imagined? The stars outside seemed so far away, so unreachable, but then a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Princess Caliph," the voice said, soft but firm. She turned, her heart racing as she saw the ambassador standing in the doorway, a knowing smile on his face. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked. Caliph hesitated before answering. "It is, everything is fine," she said, though she knew it was. She had given her people to humanity, but now she wondered if she had made a grave mistake. The ambassador's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear it. But remember, Princess, this is only the beginning. The future of your people is now tied to ours. Together, we will be unstoppable." This was only the beginning, Caliph thought, as the ambassador's words echoed in her mind. But what future awaited her people? And what was the true cost of their salvation? The days after the marriage were filled with ceremonial events, political meetings, and endless attention from Earth's officials. Princess Caliph had thought that, by now, she would feel the weight of her decision lifting. She had done what she had to in order to protect her people. But instead of finding peace, she only found herself more unsure, more confused by the growing tension that seemed to hang over every meeting and every encounter with the humans. The ambassador who had promised her peace and a future of honor was always present, watching from the shadows, his eyes sharp and calculating. He never left her side, always offering a smile, a reassuring word, and a hint of something deeper that Caliph couldn't quite place. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just his charm, It was the way he made her feel like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. It didn't take long for Calith to realize that her initial doubts about the alliance were justified. It wasn't just the ambassador's promises that felt off. It was the way the humans had slowly begun to ask for more and more from her people. The promises of mutual respect had turned into demands, disguised as suggestions for the greater good. Earth's influence over Isal began to grow with each passing day. She could feel her people's anxiety growing. The Elvathans had always been proud of their independence. They were not a race that had ever bowed to anyone, not even the most powerful of species. But now, the once-proud Elvathans were being asked to accept human technologies, human ways, and human rules. It was a slow process, but it was happening. And as much as Calith had hoped for the best, she could see it now. The humans were not here to help, they were here to control. It began with the advisors. The ambassador had sent a small group of human diplomats to Isal, under the pretense of establishing a cultural exchange to help the Elvathans adapt to human technology. Calith had no issue with their arrival at first. It seemed like a reasonable request. But what followed was not what she had expected. These diplomats, although polite, began to take charge. They oversaw the integration of human technology into Elvathan society, but their presence grew more and more imposing. They started suggesting changes to the Elvathan way of life, even to the sacred customs that Calith's people had upheld for generations. They said it was for the future, for progress, but Calith saw it as a slow erosion of her people's identity. The first real sign that things were going awry came when the ambassador, during a private meeting with Calith, presented her with a new treaty. The treaty would grant Earth control over Isal's outer colonies in exchange for military protection. Calith's heart sank as she read the document. It was not a partnership. It was an agreement to allow Earth to exploit her people's resources in exchange for protection against the Krillian horde. Humanity is willing to defend Isal at any cost, the ambassador said, his voice smooth as always. But these territories are critical for our shared future. We need them to ensure the safety of both our people. Calith's fingers trembled as she held the treaty. She had no choice but to sign it. If she refused, the Krillian horde would come and her people would fall. But something deep inside her resisted. She had been promised honor, but what she was holding in her hands felt like the first page of a long, dangerous chapter, where her people would be nothing more than a tool in humanity's expansion. "I will consider it," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "But I need time to consult with my council." "Of course," the ambassador replied with a knowing smile. "But remember, Princess, time is something we no longer have." "The Krillians are closing in," the words stung. Calith could feel the weight of the ambassador's pressure in every syllable. He was right, time was running out, but it wasn't just the Krillians she had to worry about. It was the humans, too. She knew that if she signed this treaty, her people's sovereignty would be compromised forever. Yet, without the protection of Earth, they would fall to the Krillians anyway. Calith walked away from the meeting feeling the crushing weight of her choices. She had hoped that the marriage would bring peace, that humanity's involvement would be the key to saving her people. But the more she saw, the more it became clear that they were not offering peace. They were offering dominance, control, and subjugation. She had been deceived, and now she had to find a way out. Over the next few days, Calith tried to find a way to speak with the other leaders of Earth, hoping for some kind of answer or guidance. But the ambassador's presence was everywhere. He kept her isolated from others, her every movement watched by his diplomats, who were always nearby, offering advice and making suggestions. One evening, as she sat alone in her chambers, Calith was approached by a young human woman. Her name was Sienna, and she was one of the diplomats who had been sent to help with the integration of human technology. Unlike the others, Sienna didn't seem interested in the political games the ambassador played. She was different, kind, straightforward, and empathetic. She had a way of speaking that made Calith feel like she wasn't just another political pawn. "I know what you're going through," Sienna said quietly as she sat beside Calith. "I've seen it in your eyes. You didn't sign up for this." Calith looked at Sienna, surprised by her words. "What do you mean?" she asked, wary of how much she could trust the human. Sienna leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ambassador has his own agenda. He's been manipulating you, manipulating your people, and using your need for protection to push his own goals." Calith's heart raced. Could this be true? Was she just a pawn in a much larger game? But what can I do? If I refuse the treaty, the Krillians will destroy us. I have no choice. You do have a choice, Sienna said. There's a faction within Earth, rebels, if you will, who believe that what the ambassador is doing is wrong. They've been trying to reach you for months. They want to help you. If you can contact them, you can expose the ambassador's plans and take back your people's future. Calith's mind was spinning. Could she trust this woman? Could there really be a group of humans who wanted to help her? How do I reach them? She asked, her voice urgent. Sienna hesitated for a moment, then stood up and handed Calith a small device. This will give you access to their network. They'll listen to you and they'll help you. Calith took the device, her fingers brushing against Sienna's as she held it. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but filled with a sense of relief. But as Sienna turned to leave, she stopped and looked back at Calith. Be careful, the ambassador will be watching. He's always watching. Calith didn't sleep that night. Instead, she spent hours studying the device Sienna had given her. It was small, unassuming, but inside it was the key to contacting the rebels, a lifeline for her people. As the hours ticked by, Calith felt the walls closing in. The ambassador's influence was everywhere, but now there was a chance to fight back. She couldn't waste any more time. Finally, she sent a message through the device, hoping against hope that the rebels would respond. Minutes passed like hours, and just as she was about to give up, a response appeared on the screen. We are watching. What do you need, princess? Calith's heart skipped a beat. The rebels were real and they were willing to help, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. She had to move quickly. I need your help, she wrote. The ambassador is deceiving us all. Earth is taking control of my people. We need a way to fight back. Can you help us? The response was almost immediate. We can, but you must act quickly. The ambassador is preparing for war. We will meet you on the outskirts of your planet. Do not tell anyone. The clock is ticking. Calith knew that this was the moment that would change everything. She had to make a choice. Stay silent and watch her people fall under Earth's control, or fight back and risk everything for a chance at freedom. As she sent the message, she looked out over the city below, her heart filled with determination. She wasn't just a princess. She was a leader, and she would not let her people be enslaved, not by the Krillians and certainly not by humanity. It was time to act. Calith's heart raced as she stood on the bridge of her personal ship, staring out into the endless void of space. The decision she had made was irreversible now. There was no turning back. She had sent the message and the rebels had answered. A part of her still hesitated, unsure of what would come next. But another part, the part that had grown tired of being manipulated and controlled, pushed those doubts aside. The Elvethans would not fall under the heel of Earth's ambitions, not without a fight. The rebellion had been a quiet affair so far. The human rebels, hidden within Earth's own borders, had kept their movements well concealed. Calith's contact with them had been brief and cautious. She had to be careful. The ambassador had eyes everywhere. If he found out what she was planning, her entire people would be at risk. And yet, Calith couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Earth had come to her people with promises of peace, but all they had given her was control. And now they were preparing to use her people's land and resources for their own purposes, while pretending to be their saviors. The door to the bridge slid open, and Sienna entered, her face serious. Calith had trusted her from the beginning, and Sienna had not let her down. The young human woman had been a valuable ally, helping Calith make contact with the rebels and keeping the ambassador's eyes off her. But now, as the time to confront the ambassador drew near, Calith knew that every step had to be calculated. The stakes were too high. I've received word, Sienna said, her voice low. The rebels are ready. They've gathered a small fleet. We can make our move now before the ambassador brings his forces to full strength. Calith nodded. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it. The rebellion was no longer a distant possibility. It was real. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew she was risking everything, but there was no other choice. The future of her people, her planet, depended on the success of this mission. What do we need to do? Calith asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. We'll meet the rebels on the outskirts of Isol's outer colonies, Sienna replied. They've got the ships, the firepower. It won't be easy, but with their help we can free your people from the ambassador's control. Calith took a deep breath. And what about the ambassador? She could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air. Sienna's face hardened. The ambassador is a threat to both of us now. He's already begun moving his forces. We don't have much time. Calith nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Then it's time we end this. The journey to the outer colonies was tense. Calith spent most of the time alone in her quarters, preparing herself for what was to come. She couldn't afford to show weakness. She had been the leader of her people for less than a year, and already she was facing the most difficult decision of her life. She had chosen to ally with the humans, believing that they would offer her people the protection they needed. But now, she saw them for what they truly were, a species eager to expand their reach and control others, no matter the cost. The ship's intercom crackled, breaking her thoughts. "We're approaching the designated coordinates, Princess," a voice announced. "The rebel fleet is in position." Calith stood up from her seat, her resolve hardening. This was the moment. There would be no more waiting. She could hear the hum of the ship's engines as it slowed, coming to a halt near the outer colonies. Through the window, she could see the small fleet of rebel ships waiting in the distance, sleek, powerful, and ready to fight. Sienna appeared at her side, a determined look in her eyes. "We'll move in with the rebels and take the ambassador's fleet by surprise. We can do this." Calith's gaze remained fixed on the ships outside. She could feel the power of the moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The stakes had never been higher, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Calith felt a sense of clarity. This was her fight now. She would lead her people, not as a pawn in someone else's game, but as their protector and their guide. The door to the bridge slid open, and a tall figure entered, the rebel leader. His name was General Cadden, and he was every bit the leader Calith needed right now. He exuded confidence, his expression calm but focused. His people had been fighting Earth's control for years, and he knew how to lead a rebellion. "Princess," Cadden said, his voice strong, "we're ready." Calith turned to face him, her eyes steady. "Let's end this." The battle was fierce. The rebel fleet, led by General Cadden, engaged the ambassador's forces with a precision that Calith had never seen before. Rebel ships darted through space, launching calculated strikes against the human fleet, while Calith's ship remained in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Calith could see the distant flashes of light as the two fleets clashed. The soundless explosions of energy rang through the void of space, illuminating the dark emptiness. The fight was everything Calith had hoped for and feared, swift, violent, and full of uncertain outcomes. "We're approaching the ambassador's flagship," Sienna said, her voice tense. "We need to act now." Calith nodded, her heart racing. The ambassador's flagship was the heart of his power. If they could take it down, they could break his control over the entire fleet. The ship lurched as they sped toward the ambassador's flagship, their weapons ready. It felt like a lifetime before Calith heard the command. "Now!" Cadden shouted from the bridge. Calith felt the ship tremble as the rebels launched a full assault. Their weapons blazed, cutting through the void of space with deadly precision. The ambassador's fleet fought back with everything it had, but the rebels were faster, more agile. Calith's own ship joined the fray, moving in close to the flagship. "We're in range," the commander of the ship called. "Ready to fire." Calith stood still, watching as the massive rebel ship fired upon the flagship. The beam struck the ambassador's vessel, and for a moment there was nothing but light and silence. Then the explosion. The flagship cracked, its systems beginning to fail. Calith's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The ambassador's fleet, now leaderless, began to break apart. Rebel ships closed in, disabling the remaining human ships with pinpoint accuracy. Within moments, the battle had turned in favor of the rebels. Calith's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold. The ambassador's flagship was crippled, and his forces were falling apart. "We've won," Sienna said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and relief. But Calith's eyes remained fixed on the destruction unfolding outside. The ambassador was still alive, somewhere on that ship, and he would not surrender easily. "I need to confront him," Calith said. "We can't let him escape." Calith, Sienna, and General Cadden boarded a smaller ship, moving toward the wreckage of the ambassador's flagship. The path was treacherous, filled with debris and scattered wreckage, but they pressed on, determined to finish what they had started. The corridors of the ambassador's flagship were eerily quiet, the hum of the ship's systems slowly dying. The once grand vessel now seemed like a tomb. As Calith moved through the ship, she felt a sense of finality. They found the ambassador in the heart of the ship, surrounded by his remaining loyalists. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, but he still held himself with the same arrogant poise. "You think you've won?" The ambassador spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This is just the beginning. You cannot stop what is already set in motion." Calith's eyes were hard as she stepped forward. "It ends now, Ambassador." With a swift motion, she activated the control panel on her wrist, sending a signal to the rebel fleet to disable the remaining defenses of the flagship. The ship's systems began to shut down, and the ambassador's face twisted in fury. "This isn't over," he snarled, but Calith didn't flinch. "It is," she replied. "You will never control my people again." With that, the ambassador was taken into custody, his ambitions crushed. As Calith stood on the deck of her ship, watching the rebel fleet move toward the horizon, she felt a deep sense of relief. The battle was over. The ambassador was defeated. Her people were free. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Calith felt like she had a future worth fighting for. "We did it," Sienna said, smiling at her. Calith turned to face her, her expression filled with gratitude. "We did, but it's only the beginning." The galaxy was a vast and uncertain place, but Calith now knew one thing for sure. She would protect her people, no matter the cost. And with her new allies, she was ready to face whatever came next.